Well, hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. First tonight, the date is set for the first sales in Mississippi State Lottery. The State Lottery Corporation says it's looking to make the first games available on December 1st and is putting out requests for proposal for an online lottery gaming system and an instant lottery game service. Well, tonight, we're going to talk about all aspects of the lottery. And joining me now is WJTV 12's Gerald Harris and Gerald Gibbert, Vice Chair of the Lottery Corporation. Now, just walk us through things that we're expecting with the lottery as we get closer to December 1st.
Sure, happy to. Glad to be here, Byron, Gerald. We have issued the request for proposals, the RFPs, as you indicated, for both the online games and the scratch-off games, and then the warehousing and distribution of those tickets as well. We expect to have the proposal responses to those in hand sometime early August is our date at this point. We'll review those, probably entertain some face-to-face presentations to the board of directors and our president, and then we'll select those vendors and hopefully get going.
Kind of walk us through the progress you've made so far. I know you've selected a president of the Lottery Corporation. Talk to us about where we've gotten so far, because I know many people are anticipating when are we going to be able to utilize the lottery.
Sure, absolutely. So the lottery law was signed by the governor in the special session in August of 2018, and then he appointed the board of directors. There's 5 members on the board, of which I serve. And since then, we've met at least monthly, sometimes more than once a month. By law, we have to meet every month for the first 18. And we selected our attorney. We've obtained insurance to insure the corporation. As you said, we hired a president who started June 1st. He's been on board since then. We're starting to outfit the corporation with some other key staff, director of HR, finance, controller. We've extended an offer to an IT director and so forth. So just building out a company from scratch. We expect this company eventually to produce about $400 million of gross revenue. So you can imagine there's a lot of work involved there. So now we're getting further through the procurement phase. We're looking at those gaming vendors. The other big task we have to complete to go live is authorizing the retailers to sell those tickets. We expect within 30 to 45 days to have an online tool published where retailers can complete an application. The board will have to promulgate the rules on what is required to be authorized as a retailer. The law stipulates some minimum requirements, financial requirements, must pass a background check, pretty standard stuff there. But then as we go through that process, we'll authorize those retailers. We'll turn those names and addresses over, if you will, to our lottery gaming vendors. They'll deploy the systems in the retail locations, and hopefully we'll start selling tickets.
When you talk about that $400 million, is that an annual amount, or is that how do you break that number down for us?
Yeah, Byron, and it's an estimate at this point, and I tell you how we come up with that number. It's solely based on our analysis of a similar state, that being Arkansas in our case. So the state of Arkansas, very similar to size and scale and economics as Mississippi is. And so they're on a run rate this fiscal year of about $400 million. Now once we get seasoned and get all of our retailers on board, Arkansas has about 1,300 retailers. Our budget for the first year, which would start December 1, the first operating year, if you will, is about $125 million. That's what, in working with our president, we think we could produce in terms of gross revenue.
How much money are we losing to those living on the borders, going to Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana?
Yeah, it's an estimate at this point. We think some $40 to $60 million. In lottery lingo, they call that leakage. And so we think that we have Mississippi citizens that are playing the games in the neighboring state, the adjacent states that have state lotteries. That would be Tennessee, Arkansas, and Louisiana. And you talk to anybody and they'll tell you about their experience in just crossing the border from here through Vicksburg into Delhi, Louisiana, where they see the retailers over there and the parking lot's full of, especially when the Mega Millions and Powerball games are up, full of Mississippi tags, and they're spending Mississippi dollars in those retailers. So our governor is determined to keep that money at home in passing the law, and so are we as a lottery corporation.
Will we see a Powerball Mega Millions eventually in Mississippi?
We will. We are authorized by law to sign up for that and apply for membership into the multi-state games. Our president has extensive experience with that, so we're in good shape there. We'll start that process of application pretty soon. We expect to have those in place by the second quarter, if everything goes right, second quarter 2020. So kind of the schedule is the scratch-off tickets in a limited number of retailers. We hope 500 by December 1. We'll continue to get the other retailers up online, and those games, the online ticket games where you go to the terminal in the retailer and select a game, then put your numbers in, that produces a ticket. We hope to have that up in the first quarter, and then the Mega Millions Powerball in the second quarter.
And where's the money going? Once we generate this revenue, where's the money going?
Sure, Gerald. The first $80 million of net proceeds, which is another word for profit, if you will, produced by the Lottery Corporation, is transferred to the state highway fund. So the driving reason I think we even have a lottery here in Mississippi that the legislature and the governor got on board with is to fund the state highway fund and hopefully produce some money for roads and bridges in the state. The excess, and that's in a year, by the way, the $80 million, the excess over that goes to the Education Enhancement Fund. That's the operating model for the first 10 years. After that, the first $80 million goes to the general fund, unless that's amended by the legislature. Now, to put that in perspective, the average lottery generates about 30% of sales to the bottom line. So you can kind of do the math there. If we get to that $400 million mark, that would produce $120 million of net proceeds, net profit, if you will, for the state.
A lot of money for roads and education.
Correct. That's exactly right. And that's the objective, and we feel good about getting there.
Talk about a little bit about the challenges that you've been facing as you're trying to get this together.
Well, the main challenges we've had are just going through this RFP processes and the procurement processes. To date, that's been the big thing. And of course, securing staff. It was a critical aspect of what we've been doing is hiring a president. So we drafted, if you will, a job description for the president and those responsibilities. It did require previous lottery experience. We stipulated that in that job offer. And so we interviewed 3 finalists. We received about 35 resumes, interviewed 3 finalists, all from out of state, as you can imagine, requiring that lottery experience. And I think we selected the right party for that. It's Mr. Tom Shaheen, serves as our president. So that was a trying matter. I think these RFPs and getting through those for the lottery game vendor services, that will be a challenge for us. And then I think the biggest task, the most tedious task, will be the retail authorization, just because you're dealing with so many different parties. We know lots of retailers out there are anxious, they're ready to get going, want to participate in this. I can also tell you that our research has shown that the average transaction size for a retailer without the lottery is about $6, and with sale of lottery tickets is $10. So as you can imagine, the retailers are interested and anxious to get that going.
Gerald Gibbard, Ari, thank you very much. Talking about the lottery, December 1 is our deadline for things where folks will be able to play the game in Mississippi. We thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Of course, we'll have much more on Mississippi Insight right after this. And welcome back. We are exactly 1 month away from the Mississippi primary. Hundreds of candidates for a statewide and a local office are on the ballot. And we're also looking ahead to March 10th, 2020, when the presidential race rolls through our state. Now, to talk about all this, we're joined by political analyst Dr. Nathan Schrader from Millsaps College. And just last week, you put out a poll from Millsaps showing Joe Biden as the overwhelming favorite here in Mississippi. But lots have happened since the first round of debates taken place down in Miami. Things have kind of shaken up now. It seems like it's a 4-person race there. Joe Biden slipping in the polls there. Right. Kamala Harris now in second, Elizabeth Warren in third, and then Bernie Sanders kind of in fourth. Kind of size that up, how that has taken place after 2 days of debate there in Miami.
Right. Well, part of this is there have been previous election years where the debates weren't widely watched. The early ratings that came out, I saw they estimated over 18 million people watched on TV, and maybe that same number streaming it on some type of computer or phone. So you happen to have just more people maybe tuning in. So people who are still making up their minds. We released a Millsaps Chisholm pre-debate poll just of Mississippi Democratic primary voters several days before the Miami debates. And we wanted to do that to establish a benchmark. what are Mississippi Democrats thinking about this presidential race pretty far out, but also right before that first round of debate started. And Joe Biden did have in a 24-way race, had 50% of the vote. In fact, no other candidate came even close. The next one was about 7%, and 20-some% were undecided. But I think we would see there may be some shifting after that debate. But there were two really interesting data points that come out of our poll, the one that came out before the debate. And those things are that nearly 60% of Mississippi Democrats say that they were very comfortable with their choice, that they felt very strongly with the person that they said they're all ready for will remain their choice. The second piece of information there was compared to some of the national polls, Mississippi Democrats are extremely optimistic about the possibility or likelihood of defeating Donald Trump. I've seen that mixed in some other state polls. Here, there were only, I think, like 7 or 8% combined who said it's a less than 50-50 chance or hardly any chance of winning in November. So there was a sense of optimism from Mississippi Democrats in our polling numbers pre-debate.
So do you think things are going to change much compared to how, is Mississippi going to line up with the national polls, do you think? Because Kamala Harris did very well, and her numbers are growing not only in women, but African Americans as well. And the gap between white voters is closed with her and Joe Biden.
Right. It's hard to tell just yet if Mississippi is good. Because Joe Biden's lead in Mississippi was higher than it was at any point in any of the other state polls or the national polls. So that's why he had a little more wiggle room here. If he had a bad debate night or struggled there, I don't think he was going to slip as quickly here. He was his support among African American voters here in Mississippi was very strong, even stronger than among the white Democratic electorate here. And it's always important to remember when you're comparing Mississippi Democratic presidential primary voters to the rest of the country, nearly 75% of the people who will be voting in the Mississippi Democratic primary next March are African American voters. Only about 23% are white voters. So that we have a much larger share of African American Democratic primary voters in Mississippi than in most other parts of the country. But that is where Biden's strength has been. And so that's why we'll see if he starts to experience slippage among those voters, the African American voters in our poll, we found him to be especially strong. Then he might be in trouble.
How important is the March 10th primary going to play for Mississippi? It's coming after Super Tuesday, but there's
Right.
still several other states like Ohio, Michigan that vote on the same day as we do.
Right.
How important is that primary going to be for us?
It will still be very important. And you just look back at the last primary here. Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders in 2016 were still locked in their party primary fight when the Mississippi primary rolled around. Donald Trump had not sewn up the Republican nomination yet, and that's why you had visits from Trump, Cruz, Rubio, and Kasich, I believe, all visiting Mississippi. Bill Clinton visited on behalf of Hillary Clinton. So even the last time around, Mississippi was after Super Tuesday, but our primary election was still important and it still packed a punch because you're still accumulating delegates, and that's the name of the game.
Go now locally to the governor's race. We haven't seen much of Jim Hood lately. He seems to be low key now. Is that bode in his favor now, or do you think he's making a mistake not being out there?
That's an excellent question because it seems like what we see the most of are Tate Reeves and Bill Waller right now, two of the three Republican contenders. You tend to see the most on television ads. They seem, at least on social media ads, I tend to see those pop up the most frequently. Jim Hood, it's almost, there's an assumption by many people that Jim Hood will win the Democratic nomination. He's in this race with maybe 6, 7 lesser known Democrats. The issue is probably not going to be winning that. It's going to be winning it decisively enough that at the day after the primary to say, well, yes, Jim Hood is the nominee of the party and he's very strong because he came through that large field of candidates with a big victory. So it's still important, even though his primary victory is probably not so much in doubt, is how substantial will that victory be? And the larger a victory that he rolls up in that primary, the better it will be for him to project himself as a strong contender who's likely to run toe-to-toe with whoever the Republican nominee is in a red state.
Yeah, but we had a truck driver win in the Democratic side, so anything could happen, but that's,
yes.
But we're not expecting that this year.
Not expecting it, but we weren't expecting it the last time. But here's the difference between then and now. Back then, there wasn't a Jim Hood on the ballot, right, in that primary. Jim Hood is a household name in Mississippi, very well known in Democratic circles, and that's the folks who will be voting in this primary. The last time around, there were 2 other candidates on the ballot other than Robert Gray, the truck driver. but none of them were as well known as Jim Hood is today among those same voters.
Talk about the money as far as statewide. What are we looking at? I know more money is going to be exposed and later on this month. But what are we looking at as far as how Jim Hood's doing compared to Tate Reeves and compared to the other candidates? Judge Waller, what are we looking at?
For now, based on what we know now, Tate Reeves is sitting on a massive war chest. The last finance reports that came out earlier in June showed him having already spent a substantial amount of money this calendar year, still has over $6 million in reserve. With that kind of money, you can run whatever kind of campaign you want. You can be on television all day and all night if you want to in all the media markets here. You can buy all the social media ads that you need. You can hire the campaign team that you need to get the job done. But one of the things that impressed me with Bill Waller's campaign, his fundraising was nowhere close to Lieutenant Governor Reeves. But the thing that is impressive to me is look at how long Tate Reeves has been setting up to run for governor. Justice Waller just got into this race a few months ago. So he had, I believe, had raised over $500,000 in that short period of time. That's not identical to Tate's $6.3 million in the bank, but it's enough to get your campaign moving, and it's enough to get your name known in some places where it might not be before. And one of the challenges that the Waller campaign faces here, remember, everyone probably at some point has read about him being on the bench, being on the state Supreme Court. But remember that in Mississippi, state Supreme Court justices run in judicial districts. So there are voters, Republican primary voters, in other districts, judicial districts, that never had the chance to vote for him. So he's probably better well known in the judicial district where he's already won elections. So he has to use some of that money to get himself well known very quickly in the districts where he's never been a candidate, where Tate Reeves has been a candidate and on the ballot many, many times over the years.
That's going to be an interesting time. We got a month before the primaries coming up, and also a lot going on with the presidential election, too. So it's going to be an interesting time coming up for the next several months and into 2020.
Absolutely.
All right. Dr. Nathan Strader joining us with a good talk about the state of politics here in Mississippi and also across the nation. And coming up next, Walt Grayson shares an often overlooked contribution to the U.S. Civil War that's only recently getting recognition. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We've all heard and studied about the heroics of the generals and battles of the Civil War. But WJTV 12's Walt Grayson says there was one unit from Mississippi that fought for the Union and has been given very little credit until recently.
You know, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that I had no idea there were African-American soldiers in the Civil War until I ran across a tombstone similar to one of these back behind me. These are in the military park in Vicksburg. The one I saw was in Grand Gulf State Park. The inscription on it read USCT. I had no idea what that meant. Turns out that it's United States Colored Troop. I had no idea there were any. Turns out there were a significant number of them.
Well, that lack of acknowledgement and lack of knowledge is what the members of the 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry reenactors are trying to combat. John Russell is spokesperson for the group, but why is the contribution of these troops not more prominent in the history books?
Well, you said it's the U.S. Colored Cavalry.
Well, thank goodness for Google. You can look them up. The 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry was organized here in Mississippi and saw action from Milligan's Bend in the Vicksburg campaign all the way through Grierson's second raid through Mississippi in 1865, when a good half of his troops were African American, and much more.
The significant role that African Americans played in the Civil War has just started coming to light within the last couple of decades. Now, for instance, the African American Monument here in the Vicksburg National Military Park was just dedicated in 2004.
The 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry reenactors have a couple of goals. One is short-term.
Trying to stay on our horses.
But the long-term goal is to bring some recognition to the U.S. colored troops in the Civil War, another group of veterans who fought and died for the United States. I'm Walt Grayson, WJTV 12.
All right, good piece of history to know. And we'll be right back with a preview of the only televised GOP debate, Mississippi Race for Governor.
We are less than a month away from the only televised statewide Republican gubernatorial debate. It's been hosted by WJTV 12. Byron Brown, Melanie Christopher, and myself will moderate. Here's an exclusive look inside of the debate. Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves, retired Chief Justice Bill Waller, and Representative Robert Foster will meet at the WJTV 12 studios for the first and only time to debate. Just 2 weeks away from the primary election on August 6th, television markets across Mississippi will air the 1-hour debate. All camps have agreed to the debate format. There are no opening statements, and candidates will receive 30 seconds for closing statements. Each person will be given 60 seconds to answer the question. If there's a follow-up question, they will be allotted 30 additional seconds. If a candidate is singled out or attacked, they will receive 30 seconds to respond. All questions will be generated by Mississippi voters and journalists. The questions will not be made available prior to the debate's broadcast. Candidates will not be allowed to bring in notes, papers, or campaign materials to the podium. The debate is scheduled for July 23rd from 7 to 8 p.m. If you have any questions that you want the candidates to answer, you can email us. The address is on your screen. It's focused@wjtv.com. We'll be right back.
And thanks again to Gerald Gibbett, Dr. Nathan Schrader, Walt Grayson, and Gerald Harris, and to you for joining us. Tune in next Saturday night for another edition of Mississippi Insight. Remember, news, weather, and sports are available 24/7 at WJTV.com on our news and weather apps. And we'll be right back next week. And until then, make it a good night.